So when we look at learning, what do you think of when I say you've learned something? We can't just think about you've memorized something for an exam and the next time you take the exam, after that you totally forget all of the information. What we really want to look at is when you learn something, you actually acquire knowledge, but then you modify your behavior as a result. So what do we mean by this? Well, we can look at a number of different things, including just a some simple stimulus that causes a response, some sort of complex problem solving that you have to do. When we look at these learning conditions in animals, what we actually want to see is that they change their behavior and they change it in response to something that's going on in the environment. So, back to your alarm clock for a minute. I mentioned a while ago that we want to talk about your alarm clock, and everyone's kind of innate response when the alarm goes off is to smack the top of the alarm clock. Very few of us actually jump out of bed ready for the day, right? So habituation is actually one of the simplest forms of learning that we have, and it basically is going to say, okay, when my alarm goes off, I know that I'm actually not in danger. And that means that if your alarm is going off and there's no danger, why are you going to respond? Well, you may say, well, I've got to get up for class, I have to go to work, I have to go to the gym. Is that really an emergency response? No. So your brain will actually start to shut off your response to your alarm clock. So when you say, I don't remember my alarm ever going off, you are exactly right. Your brain has allowed you to process through and completely ignore your alarm. Now, when we look at this in nature, what we want to think about is, how can this be beneficial? Well, it's beneficial because you ignore the stuff that is not important, and it allows you to focus more on what is important. Okay, so it's really a filter. It's allowing you to eliminate anything that is not an urgent need. When we look at things like imprinting in animals, these are actually go along the lines that we saw before with sort of these fixed action behaviors and so on. But with imprinting, it's really learning that there is some sort of association, a very positive association with a particular organism, with a particular food, with a particular habitat. The kind of ideal example of this is a guy named Konrad Lorenz that actually found the optimal times to imprint on geese. And so what he looked at was, if he was in and around the hatchlings, the geese when they were hatching out of their shells, within that first 12 to 18 hour period, he could actually replace their mother. So before that, after that, he was looking at very different sorts of responses from the geese. If you wait too long, they won't imprint, they won't move in and let him take over as mom. But we see this in lots of animals. They do this a lot on farms. When a cow dies in childbirth, they'll move the calf to another mom. They have to do this very quickly so that both the baby and the new substitute mom are going to actually imprint and take care of one another. This goes along a lot with the idea of classical conditioning. And so when we look at classical conditioning, it really is associating a stimulus with one that you already respond to. And so many of you know the example of Pavlov's dogs, where there was a ringing of the bell that he conditioned them to know that every time he rang the bell that they would get food. Well, he did this enough times that eventually the bell was rung, but no food was given. But what he found out was the dogs would still behave as if the food would be given. So they were responding now to the bell. And how he figured out that they were responding to the bell was that they actually started to salivate. So regardless of the presence of the food, they would still salivate even when the bell was rung. And this actually didn't take very long. He only needed about 5 to 6 trials of ringing the bell and giving food before the dogs would respond. Now, this also happens in nature. Animals start to associate particular occurrences, times of day, with food sources. And this is really important for survival. You have to know where your food is coming from, where your mates are located, and how to find good shelter, water, and so on. Now, some of this in nature is actually done by imitation. So animals will learn how to open nuts. Animals will learn where to find food. They'll learn where to find water based solely on watching other animals do it. Okay, so some of these imitation kinds of behaviors, baby humans are perfect examples of this. They will try to imitate absolutely everything that you do and say as a way of learning, right? But it turns out it can take us even further into something known as insight learning. And so what they've started to look at with insight learning is, can you problem solve? Basically, okay? So Wolfgang Cole did an experiment with chimpanzees, and he gave them essentially a target being a hanging bunch of bananas, okay? So he gave them bananas on a string here, and he gave them boxes, and you see that the chimpanzee was able to reach the bananas with the boxes, or, these are 2 different trials, or he gave them a stick, okay, and allowed them to reach the bananas with just the stick. So what he did then was he raised the bananas. So they were too high to reach with the boxes and the stick alone, but what the chimpanzees figured out is if you put the boxes stacked up and then you climb up on the boxes and swing the stick or the pole, you get the bananas at the higher place. So this is complex problem-solving behaviors. We don't just see it in chimpanzees and primates. We've actually started to see it very strongly now in things like crows and ravens. Huge problem-solving skills. So in this case, a piece of meat is hung off of a post here, off of a string, and the crow really wants it. Okay? But he can't hover. These are not hovering birds. These are not hummingbirds. They're not going to just float there. So what he has to do is figure out how to get that piece of meat. And what they learned was he would reach with his beak and grab the string and pull the string up and then step on it. You see here his foot is standing on the string. And he would keep doing that, essentially like he was reeling in a fishing line, until the meat got to the top and he would eat it. These are very complex behaviors, right? That we don't see in a lot of different species, but we do see it in a few, and the ones that we see it in are pretty amazing. So a lot of these things come certainly by just simply dumb luck, trial and error, but the big thing here is memory. You have to remember when these things work. So your ability to do something in a particular environment, your ability to learn through trial and error, is all about memory. So things like associative learning. How does your dog know when it's time to go for a walk? Well, you might say it, let's go for a walk. Or you might just pick up a leash, right? If you just pick up the leash, the dog goes, oh, walk, and he's all ready, right? Now, by trial and error, your dog also learns a lot of things too, okay? Maybe he's had an encounter with a skunk or a porcupine, or something that was harmful to him, and he will eventually learn to associate that with a very negative effect. Trial and error doesn't always have to be negative. It can be positive. So we look at different types of behaviors, and you can start to think about in your daily life what these behaviors might mean.